Hello and welcome to the Migraine Diaries, a week-by-week account of me trying to design, fund, produce and promote my game. Probably also with my inevitable mental breakdown at some point. Okay, so before these video diaries can become mainly about updates on the game's progression, there's a fair bit of ground to cover. So what I'm going to do is tell you a bit more about the actual game itself, and then at the end I'll do just a potted update of where I am and what's going to come next after that. Right, so what I've always loved about horror is the mixing of the familiar and the absurd. And so the game is set in an office building. Yes, I already know about One Late Night. It was pretty good. But it's one of those really super functional prefab sort of ones, you know, thin walls, wiry carpet, cheap ceiling tiles, you know, just about at the minimum level of quality for general use. And I'm pretty sure everyone's worked in one of those sort of places at one point. So the setup goes like this. You play as June, who's a kind of a low tier worker in the kind of corporate world of time cards and performance reviews at an insurance adjusters called Switchco. So far, so work a day. And one day she just awakes suddenly from a sort of a terrifying, all-consuming sort of series of nightmare visions to just the kind of low hum of office computers in a completely vacant office. Obviously she's confused and not a bit anxious about this, and so she searches around for signs of life, but instead discovers the body of one of her younger colleagues, his torso kind of twisted and bloated into impossible shapes, you know, sort of vintage body horror. And she roams the offices looking for clues as to why her colleagues have disappeared, gaining access to their PCs, looking at their correspondence, looking at other tangible stuff like written notes and sort of personal possessions and stuff like that. And essentially her first mission is just to find out why everyone's cleared off. And as things go on, she starts to piece together the stories that led to the staff being absent and the sort of wider calamities contained within different intersecting plot lines that contributed to this whole thing. And as she goes along, she encounters sort of freakish body horror style hallucinations of sort of like living memories that the staff have left behind. And some are hostile, some are not. And there's no combat in the game because frankly I think once you have a weapon in hand, horror ceases to become as effective as it should be. So okay, so far so familiar, and I intentionally chose a familiar setup, both in terms of the kind of real world office, but also aspects that horror fans might be expecting, because it's going to be all the better when I actually pull the rug out from under everyone. And it's a game that asks how well you know the people you work with, because as I've said before, it'll be integral to solving the puzzles that facilitate progress. So you have to dig into every aspect of their private lives to find out why everyone's disappeared. And the reasons might be supernatural, it might just be human, but hopefully it'll be terrifying. Also, as I've said before, it's a puzzle-driven game, but it's narrative-based. And I know the nature of games is essentially play. That's the ludological point of view. But I've always loved games or game environments as a narrative medium. I love exploration. And there's just something about being in a world where you're not simply a passive observer, both in terms of the actions you can take and location-wise. It just helps immersion in a way I think no other medium can. And in the, what I would say, the contemporary absence of an artificial intelligence substitute for generating compelling and emotionally involving stories, I still think there's a lot of life left in the sort of narratology approach to games. And there's definitely an authored story to be told here. I love to be told stories, and I still think other people do. There are several games that I rate in terms of telling a story, and they come in several forms, really. There are the pejoratively titled walking simulators like Firewatch, Gone Home, What Remains of Edith Finch, but then there are others that tell a story in a very compelling way, such as Journey, which is more of a show rather than tell approach. Portal's fantastic. I still rate Silent Hill 2. Even PT was very interesting to me. That's more about how it used the environment and the placement of objects and the repetition to tell the story, rather than the straight elements like the voice on the radio and what have you. Now, before we move on, there's one aspect I'll just quickly address, and that's the title of the game itself, Scotoma. Now, it's a happy accident that it means, in Greek, darkness. But what I'm talking about is something called scintillating scotoma, which is it's basically an alteration in the natural field of vision that manifests itself as a kind of a shifting blur, which impedes your sort of binocular perception of the world. And they're most often experienced as a precursor to a migraine. And I've had migraines pretty much all my life. They're not nearly as bad as they were, but I'll always remember the sensation when I'd be reading a magazine or something like that, and just one small part of a letter will just wink out of existence and then come back. And then I know that the scotoma is on the way, because then it starts to build and it looks like oil on water. And for me, it ended up as forming a kind of a crescent moon shape, which meant I could just not see anything in one eye. And then it slowly kind of blurs, and your normal vision returns, and then the migraine comes, which is marvellous. Anyway, I want to be able to use this in the game as a visual effect in a number of ways, not least the fact that I think it will give it a distinctly different sort of visual experience to a lot of other games out there. Firstly, obeying the rule in horror that what you can't see is scarier than what you can. When you encounter these sort of twisted creatures that lurk around the office, a certain amount of it will be obscured by the scotoma, so you're never quite sure what you're looking at. And if there's one thing I want from this game, it's for people to, what they can make out of these creatures. They'll just go, what the fuck am I looking at? Secondly, I intend to use it as a way to mark out things you can interact with as well, so you don't have to sort of bump up against the furniture and constantly clicking to see if there's something you can actually interact with. Thirdly, it will probably be used to indicate your state of your health or your sanity, as Amnesia had it. But I want to make this a real sort of a real part of the aesthetic character of the game. Okay, so the point I'm at right now is that I'm working with a programmer to come up with a prototype, but at the moment we're mainly focusing on sort of proof of concept. So the mechanics and ideas that I've got down on paper, I'm going to put into practice and see if they actually make for an interesting game. Should be able to see just a little GIF just going right there. It's not much at the moment. But there was a fair amount of work to actually get to this point where I was comfortable with asking a programmer to actually start working. So what I'm going to do on the next couple of video diaries is that I'm going to go through all the design work that I've done up to this point, and where exactly that leaves me. Because believe me, a hell of a lot has been done already, sort of design-wise, narrative-wise. So yeah, join me for the next Migraine Diaries. next Wednesday. Cheers.